Hello, souls and demons, and welcome back. In today's climate, would you be surprised to hear that your mortal leaders would use your precious souls for something nefarious? I mean, come on, they're all guilty of it. So turn off the news, sit back, relax, and enjoy this wonderful story titled, Our Leaders Are Sacrificing Us to an Evil God, written by Cecily, 1987. Our leaders are serving a malevolent entity in a desperate attempt to guarantee the survival of our species. They have been secretly paying tithe to it with the blood of our youth, the blood of our warriors. This sadistic ritual has been occurring since the late 40s. The First Major World War caught the Dark God's attention. The Second World War left him wanting more. Through the veil of reality, the thing could somehow feast on our suffering. There was so much suffering during those times that he could taste it from his forsaken corner of reality. He grew gluttonous and spoiled. Man's inhumanity to man excited him to a level he had never felt before. But when the bombs fell and the war ended, he was cut off from the outpouring of pain coming from our dimension. At first, he started taking people from our world into his, but even this wasn't enough. It wasn't the same butchering terrified animals. He wanted the excitement of heartbreak and war. He wanted to see our fighting spirit strong before we were crushed. He let us know all of this. He spoke to our world leaders at the time. He proclaimed the existence of a portal in France. This portal would be his gateway into our world. He would bring with him the war he wanted. It would scorch the land and boil our blood. But we could stop him. Well, more like slow him down. Postpone the inevitable by entering the portal ourselves to do battle with him in his own reality, his own hellscape. For over 70 years, the armies of the world dedicated troops to enter the portal and fight back the demons, hell-bent on killing all of us. We kept the Dark Lord out, and he got his bloodshed. A couple hundred lives a year was a small price to pay next to annihilation. I will tell you about the day the rules changed, and how your life will change with it. Teleportation was called jaunting or a jaunt. Some smart-ass lab tech was a fan of Stephen King, apparently. On the other side, we'd established 3 defendable bases. The biggest was Vox, surrounding the portal exit on the Hell End. Also, the only way the walking nightmares could get back to Earth. Further out was Thermopylae, Thermo for short. About 5 miles out from Vox with impenetrable defenses. No enemy had breached its position in 30 years. Last and farthest out was Alamo. This outpost was lightly manned, operating as an early warning for the other 2 bases. If overrun, the occupants could use a teleport to retreat back to Thermo or Vox. The teleport at Alamo wouldn't go directly to Earth. You had to slingshot to the larger Vox base and use Vox's power to jaunt back to Earth. The layout of the surface was simple, mockingly so. Great clouds of acidic gas surrounded Vox base, marking the perimeter we were supposed to stay in. You could only go forward for 20 miles before the ground turned to sludge. The gas was clear enough to create a strip of land to easily defend. And the gas never shifted or moved. It only hung thick and ghostly in the air, ready to melt anything that ventures into its domain. We've all been issued gas masks, regardless of the behavior of the fog. In 69 years, the enemy never flanked us from the sides by using the gas as cover. The enemy always performed frontal assaults. running down the 20-mile alleyway of gunfire and artillery towards our portal leading home. So now you are caught up on the situation. Any other question I'm sure I answer further down. My men and I had already jaunted to Vox base from Earth, and were now waiting for the technicians to start the portal back up to slingshot us to Alamo on the front lines. Captain, our jaunt is -30. Intel advises danger close from friendly artillery as soon as we enter back into real space. My second lieutenant yelled to me over the whine of the portal starting up. Why is artillery dropping so close to the LZ? I yelled in reply. Because the position has been overrun. The closest German units have fallen back to a secondary defensive position, refusing to go in unless we secure the site first. He yelled, from behind the 25 of US soldiers, packed tightly together in the small circular tunnel. If we could retake the trenches, German command will call off bombardment. Best they can do is a 5-minute ceasefire while we are retaking the bunker from the hostiles. Damn Germans. They got all of us into this mess with their 2 world wars stirring up the old one. Now they retreat and make us do the dying in the trenches. But it wasn't anything me and Cher and team couldn't handle. We were experts at clearing tunnels. The static electricity feeling rippled all over my body, making my hair stand on end. It was the portal activating. It was a feeling I had experienced countless times. Attention! Immediately close your eyes and hold your breath. The jaunt will commence in 5 seconds. A pre-recorded voice said over the intercom. I did as commanded, and within 5 seconds a flash occurred so bright. It was still brilliant through my closed eyes. It was accompanied by heat, like a microwave radiating all over my body. I knew the protective gel we were all sprayed with did its job and took the blunt of most of the heat. But my exposed skin would always be sunburnt bright red, no matter how many times I did the jaunt. I opened my eyes, protected by UV goggles, and turned to check on my team. They all seemed good to go, with the gel now steaming off their bodies and gear. You know the drill, gentlemen. Weapons hot. Clear your sectors and call them out. With that, I pulled the lever to open the hatch at the end of the metal tub we were all packed in. It opened upwards and I racked my shotgun. I pivoted right like we had planned, taking the furthest right of the 3 tunnels that appeared in front of us. 6 men followed me. 7 went up the middle and 7 went down the left. 4 stayed behind to defend the portal. I hurried through the underground tunnel, boards underneath my feet creaking and dirt falling from the ceiling above me. I could only see every couple of yards ahead due to weak halogen lamps hung intermittently down the corridors. No deadies yet, Captain. What the fuck? Said Private Boeing behind me. He was echoing my thoughts exactly, but I couldn't show the team I was just as worried as them. All bunkers were mandated to be constructed the same by any deployed military units on this side of the gap. It made them easier to clear and provide support to foreign units when needed. Right now, all teams should be making towards the main underground chamber, or command post. None of the men on the other teams had made contact with the enemy yet either. The last reports from the KSK guys said they were being overrun. What was going on? My fire team was the first into the spacious command bunker. I signaled for my men to fan out and take cover where applicable. The other 2 fire teams, Bravo and Charlie, arrived shortly from separate passageways. No sign of the freaks, Lieutenant Dirge said as Bravo team filed in. I can't even smell them. I looked around the command post. Nothing seemed amiss. Tables with maps and radios, coffee cups and ashtrays, crates and cots. The smell of cigarette smoke was still fresh in the air. The big room was getting crowded with all of us crammed inside, feeling just like the teleportation portal. We were in a kill box if any deadie came knocking. God forbid if one with a flamethrower found us. Lieutenant Dirge slung his M1 and pushed past his men to the tables to begin reading the scattered paperwork. Putting his German classes Uncle Sam paid for to good use. I don't like any of this, I said loud enough for all of my men to hear. Bravo, stay behind and get what you can from those documents. Keep an eye out for our Kraut friends, if any survived. I'll take Charlie with Alpha to check it out topside. I keyed up the mic on my lapel to speak with the 4 guarding the portal. Something is wrong up here. I don't know what kind of game the deadies are playing, but keep sharp. We may need to make a rapid retreat. I had left the newest members of my squad defending the portal. They were too inexperienced to be on the front yet. They were too acceptable to the pools of madness here in no man's land. I had to wade them into the deep slowly. I have seen too many of my men succumb to suicide or psychotic breaks, killing their own squad mates. The 4 men at the portal were also the only ones with modern weaponry. Protecting the portal was paramount. If the deadies broke through, the 4 had to defend the portal until the explosives were set. We would destroy the portal before these ungodly horrors breached onto our world. As for the weapons, the deadies could somehow mimic and manufacture anything we left behind. They already upgraded their weapons from World War I era to World War II, and we didn't need them upgrading any further. The 4 men at the portal had modern M4s, grenade launcher attachments, and even a heavy 50 cal turret to defend the 3 passageways. It was cumbersome, so it was also rigged with a thermite explosive to melt it before the enemy could capture it. The last line of defense. You didn't want to be in the tunnel when that bad boy went off, unless you hate your sense of hearing. I was leading Alpha up to the tunnel to the surface. Leading from the front was not common for captains, but it emboldened my men, and I had my own secret reason for doing it. I could see the dark sky from the opening to the surface at the end of the tunnel. I could feel the bitter cold. As we made it to the surface, my men did as trained and spread out. Makeshift bunkers, sandbags, machine guns, and mortar emplacements decorated the area, but no eyes on any German soldiers. The surface was as dour and awful as it always was. Flat plains scarred with deep craters from constant artillery bombardment, stretched on past the razor wire perimeter, before turning into a sludge like mud. The mud ocean going on forever. The sky was always dark, and the air was always cold, thick with the kind of chill that sunk into your bone and sapped your strength. It was always night here, with no stars or celestial bodies to light up the sky. Only the constant flashes of heat, lightning strobing in the distance. Our flanks obscured by thick, unmoving fog. Nothing much to look at on the ground. But we all knew not to look towards the sky for too long, because sometimes the lightning illuminated a dark form, stretching upwards from the horizon line. It was something massive, spiraling endlessly into the sky. Its size unfathomable, gently swaying, like the tentacles of a gargantuan horror, trying to strangle the world we stood upon. Looking at it gave intense stabs of pain behind the eyes, and left them itching with a desperate urge to scratch them out. We all knew the thing is the Dark God, the Old One, the asshole and the reason we had to come here. We all knew this was his realm, and he invited us in, all the while despising our presence. So it was best to keep your eyes low and your mind focused on the task at hand. But you could only ignore the strangeness of this place for so long. The dread had a way of creeping in regardless, just like the cold. No wind blew across this bizarre landscape. It was like a walk-in freezer, with the unnatural chill just hanging thick around you, weighing you down, sapping your strength. When the wind did pick up, it usually heralded an attack, bringing with it waves of malformed creatures charging the wire. You could hear voices in the wind if you listened close enough, which was not recommended. The voices whispered dark and taboo things, and the voices of men that had died on this damn battlefield. If soldiers listened too long to these ghostly voices, they would eventually crack. There were 3 main outcomes to listening too intently to the whispers on the wind: suicide, panic attacks, or turning their weapons on fellow soldiers were the most common. And sometimes all 3 happened at the same time. You had to have a strong mind and mental fortitude to work out here. But that didn't mean we weren't issued a little extra help. All of my men had taken calming, antipsychotic meds before we jaunted through dimensions. Also, my guys were mostly mentally hardened veterans, having made it through multiple combat cycles with me. We weren't staying here anyways. We were only babysitting Outpost Alamo for the regular German army to come in and secure. All 20 of my men were topside, and I told them to spread out and fire off flares to illuminate the dark battlefield. "Notify command," I barked at my radio operator. "We have taken back the outpost with no resistance. Still no sign of the previous occupants. Most likely KIA. The corporal with the radio swallowed deeply. He was scared, but just the right amount of scared. The kind that keeps you alive and doesn't freeze you up. But I would have to keep an eye on him. If he started talking to himself, or swaying slightly, I'd have to detain him or kill him before he could turn on us. The corporal himself would have been a strange sight to any regular soldier not privy to the situation. He wore a standard Kevlar helmet and digital print BDUs. He had cold weather gear, entrenching tool and night vision goggles. But his weapon and ammo was decidedly non-common, being an M1 Garand with bayonet attachment. Atop the rifle he had affixed an ACOG scope. I didn't know if this broke the brass's rules about not bringing modern weaponry to the battlefield, but I had never noticed the Deddies too worried about precision aiming. I would be sure to inquire about the corporal's break in uniformity when we were back across the gap. I stared out over the trenches and embattlements. The Germans had constructed multiple hardpoints, kill boxes, and overlapping fields of fire. There should have been around 50 of them embedded here, but now they were AWOL. Not even any spent brass around the turrets. "Get the drone in the air and dig into defensive positions," I commanded on an open channel to all units. I watched my men do what they had been trained to do. They fortified the outpost and prepared to repel any signs of attack. Our job now was to hold the outpost until HQ sent our relief. We were a quick response team, not meant for sitting out long engagements. We were just babysitting until the parents got home. "Captain, the drone has spotted something about half a click out in no man's land," a soldier told me in my earpiece. No man's land. It was a moniker used for the flatland 100 meters past the wire, stretching out into the endless dark. We could dig and defend trenches in the dirt, but the stubborn rock turned to a mushy quicksand half a click out. The mud further out was impossible to move in, and it's also where the Deddies came up from. The enemy rose out of the mud like some unnatural spawn being birthed from the dark sludge. The Deddies would amass out of range to launch their attack. A frontal assault is where the attacks always came from. That was one of the only certainties in this godforsaken place. Pull the drone in close, and begin zeroing in the artillery on its position, I said as I tapped to activate the touchscreen on my wrist. I didn't know what we had yet, but it was certainly dangerous. Everything out here was. The screen on my wrist showed the visual feed from the drone buzzing around in no man's land. The bright shades of grays and white of FLIR vision glared back at me from the screen. I immediately saw what the anomaly was. It appeared to be bowling ball-sized rocks stacked on top of one another to form a crude pyramid, about 4 feet high. The circular rocks glowed brightly with an inner heat. They weren't rocks. They were something else. Oh God. Oh Lord Jesus. I heard my lieutenant speak across the open channel. I was about to chastise him on his lack of bearing when he interrupted me saying, "Enable audio. I want to hear what's going on out there." Whatever soldier was operating the drone controls complied, and the static pop of audible feedback emitted from the screen on my wrist. I went to turn down the audio manually, but it was too late. The noise blared, echoing around the outpost from every soldier with a wrist mount. The undeniable cries of moaning and pleading came from the stack of rocks. Many voices all pleaded at once in a cacophony of suffering, like animals on the brink of death, wanting a finishing blow to end its suffering. Worst of it, I realized the voices were pleaded in the German language. The pyramid was the stacked heads of the missing soldiers. My men around the camp that had been working had frozen in fear. Some crowded around the nearest soldiers with a wrist mount. Others stared nervously out into the dark abyss, as if they could spot the pile of heads with their own eyes. "Turn that noise off," I shouted into my mic. "Eyes up, gentlemen. Prepare to repel hostiles." The cold wind began sharply whipping through the trenches, as if activated when we stumbled across the pile of horrors. The whispers came also. Sharp hissing whispers, speaking blasphemy and cruelty, and a constant unending fury. I watched the feed from the drone while everyone else followed my orders, disregarding the horrors unfolding in the dark. Now that I knew they were severed heads, I could make out their details better. I could make out their uniform, short-length hair, the ghoulish dark around their eyes making cooler spots, and their mouths opened in screams. How were they still so warm? How were they screaming? Where were the bodies? What the hell did this to them? I got my answer to the question quickly. 2 long, spindly arms shot out from the muddy sludge in front of the severed heads. The arms were longer than any humans I'd ever seen. Flat black like they had been burnt, long fingers writhing in the air like hypnotic vipers. The arms continued reaching skywards out of the muck, at least 4 feet high. The fingers suddenly became rigid, as if struck by a rigor mortis. The fingers thrust back into the ground, clawing deep to pull the rest of its body out. Bony shoulders and torso emerged. From what I could see, the thing had no head, just a neck and lower jaw. On the jaw protruded 2 wicked fangs stabbing upwards, like the jaw of the long-dead saber-toothed tiger. The thing pulled itself out of the mud to stand tall. About 8 feet, blackened and skeletal, skinny and bipedal. Long, narrow swords and daggers crisscrossed through the thing's body, like some strange voodoo doll. It reached its long hand out to pick up a screaming head from the top of the pile, cupping it with both hands to place it on top of its neck, similar to how someone would put on a motorcycle helmet. The head continued its awful screaming as it was jostled on top of the neck, on top of the bestial lower jaw. The headless abomination must have realized it wouldn't fit. so it held the head out in front of itself. It put the fingers of one hand in the screaming head's mouth, gagging it. With a sickly and sudden jerk, the thing ripped the lower jaw off the head. Once again, the now jawless head was placed on top of the neck, and this time it stayed. The thing craned its neck to look up at the flying drone with its new head. It felt like the thing was staring into my soul through the monitor. The camera feed cut out, and I knew the creature was coming for me. "Contact left, 9 o'clock, came the warning from one of my men over the radio. It was immediately followed by the thunderous repeating boom of an MG-42, mounted machine gun going full auto. "Multiple contacts across the wire," announced another soldier's voice, as a cacophony of small arms fire rippled down the line. I grabbed my binoculars and stood up to look over my sandbag emplacement to survey the situation. Turns out I didn't need the binos, because the enemy is already on top of us. Ghouls, zombies, deadies, whatever you choose to call them. Hundreds of them were sprinting right for us. Twisted versions of humans, with glowing red eyes and abnormally extended mouths, filled with rows of sharp teeth. Some wore digital camo, some wore German helmets from both world wars. Some were naked, genitals swaying back and forth as they threw themselves into the barrage of bullets. They were all mishapen and wrong in one way or another. Some had too many limbs or too little, or both limbs on the same side. But all had mouths gaping full of fangs. They were false humans. They were homunculi. They were a mockery of the human form. It's like an alien tried to create a human from memory. They must have been coming out of the mud, as we were distracted by the stacked heads and the headless creature. They had mustered just out of range for a sudden charge, an onslaught of flesh. It was a degree of planning I had never seen from them. "Lieutenant Dirge, get your men and your ass up here," I yelled to my lieutenant, still trying to make sense out of the documents down in the bunker. Lieutenant Dirge and his men barreled out of the underground tunnel to see what horror awaited all of us. To their credit, they showed only a moment's hesitation before they took the defensive position. Most of the deadies were mowed down about 50 meters from the wire. As the slain fell, others trampled over their bodies to be cut down only inches closer. Little by little, the endless waves of attackers got closer to the defensive perimeter. The mortar teams worked quickly, dropping one shell after another into overheating tubes. The explosions rocked the landscape with brilliant flashes of red mist and body parts. A sense of panic was rising in my battle-hardened soldiers, as the wall of flesh and teeth inched closer, slow and steady. The deadies were getting close enough to lob grenades into our midst before being shot down. I saw one of my machine gunners get flung sideways from a grenade that landed in front of the trench he was firing from. The shrapnel was at eye level and obliterated his head. His buddy had to pry his dead friend's death grip from the weapon, so he could take over. Incoming enemy rounds began pelting the area around us. Some deadies had warped versions of MP4s and Thompson submachine guns. They fired with reckless abandon, hoping to suppress us enough to get just a little closer. My shotgun wasn't going to be very effective until the deadies crossed the wire. And they would cross it eventually. This was terrifyingly obvious as the wave of undead died, just 15 meters out. "Rear security. We may need a quick exfil. Be on standby," I yelled into my mic, trying to be heard over the gunfire. No response came, even when I tried to hail them multiple times. This was bad. If this outpost fell, we needed to destroy the portal that leads back to Vox and back to Earth. How had the deadies gotten around us to get my guys guarding our exit? Now the dead were piling up just 4 meters from the defensive line. The deadies numbered in the hundreds, creating a wall of bodies. They were so close that I could smell their putrid stink, carried by the whispering wind. A flurry of new explosions went off down the line. The claymore mines were tripped and blasted the stinking mud back, giving us some much-needed breathing room. But still they came, clambering over the mutilated bodies that stood between them and the soft flesh of my men. I noticed something different now. They were walking instead of sprinting. More Dawn of the Dead instead of 28 days later. They pushed all the way up to the wire, many being shot and dropping the whole time. The fear was palpable now, and my men abandoned the frontline trench and backed up to station themselves around me. The deadies still didn't cross the razor wire. They stopped short just to be added to the growing wall of downed enemies. The wall of dead was almost waist high when it gave the order to cease fire. My men were reluctant to listen, so I had to smack the helmet of a nearby soldier with the butt of my shotgun. Finally, my men stopped firing into the mass of red-eyed monsters. The deadies stood shoulder to shoulder, glaring at us over the barrier of their own slain. The quiet was shocking to my senses. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and heard ringing in both my ears. I heard a soldier mumbling some sort of prayer while kissing the crucifix from around his neck. A cold sweat on most of us as we stared at the enemy just meters away. Ears. I spoke quietly but sternly into my mic, trying to get my men to listen. I could have just talked aloud to the 20 soldiers clustered around me, but I didn't want the deadies to hear me. I never had to worry about being overheard before, but they were showing a freakish level of intelligence. Leapfrog back down to the portal 5 men at a time. Prime the C4 to blow. I don't know why they stopped, but we will take advantage of their hospitality. I turned to look at Lieutenant Dirge. Lieutenant, take 4 with you to start, double time. I expected a yes sir, or just a flurry of movement as they followed my orders, but nobody moved. All I got was more silence, as both sides just quietly stared at each other. I felt anger grow in my chest as I commanded again. You better remove your head from your ass and get to it, Lou. Still no movement from the lieutenant, as I scanned the faces of terror, stricken men around me. I ordered all of you to unfuck yourselves and have some bearing, like your goddamn soldiers. They still didn't move. Were they literally frozen with fear? What the hell was happening? The soldier I had pummeled earlier was still in front of me with his back turned. I would whack him again for good measure. I went to step forward and my legs didn't respond. My brain sent the signals and nothing happened. I just stood there, like my feet were stuck in invisible clamps. That's when I noticed the muffled noises coming from the soldiers. I turned my head back to Lieutenant Dirge, his eyes scanning frantically, muffled screams coming from his clenched jaw. They were all frozen. I looked back and forth to see the same expression of terror and muffled screams. The majority of us were frozen in the open, with only a few taking cover at the time. Soldier, all of you snap out of it, I screamed to the statue-like men around me. I could still move from the waist up, while the rest of them were completely immobilized. I even tried to pull up my own legs to move myself, but some sort of unnatural force held me fixed to a point. The deadies all lined up by the wire started moving again. This time they all worked in unison to clear a path between their stinking crowd of monsters. They pulled their dead aside with quiet and quick proficiency. The hundreds of them parted like the Red Sea. showing me a clear pathway leading far out into no man's land. That's when I saw it. The tall, blackened creature that wore the head of its victim. It strolled down the path made for him towards me. It towered over the mob of deadies. As it got closer, the muffled screams of my men grew more frantic. 4 deadies threw themselves on the razor wire for the thing to gracefully walk on their backs and stepped over the line. I could see the head he wore belonged to a blonde Caucasian man, with the 2 fangs giving him a pronounced underbite. It stopped 3 meters in front of me. The eyes of the dead German were glowing red now. It grabbed hold of a large black spike that pierced through its thin body and wrestled it free, unsheathing the weapon buried in his chest. It held the long onyx blade out to point at me. "Guten Tag, Kapitan," the creature said in a booming and clear voice. I wondered how a voice that loud could come from a head with severed vocal cords. It continued speaking to me in a thick German dialect. I stared in horror at the thing, not knowing what to do. I had my shotgun, but would I just be sentencing my men to death if I opened fire? This is the first time the deadies had made any sort of effort to communicate, and I couldn't run if I needed to, because I still couldn't move from the waist down. The creature paused in its speech, as if waiting for me to reply. I blinked and frantically combed my mind to reply. "Ich spreek English? Nein Deutsch? Nein verstehen?" The creature cocked its ghoulish head and nodded in understanding. It straightened and faced the soldier in front of me, the one I had hit earlier. It raised its thin black sword in preparation for a strike. The soldier stared at his would-be killer and let out a futile scream, helpless to stop it. The black blade whipped across in a blink of an eye, a swish of air and the gurgling sound of a scream being cut short. The soldier still stood there, eyes rolling back in his head, and blood running down his chest from his neck. Some evil force was holding the dead man up, frozen, even though he was dead. The spinely creature grasped the man's head with both hands and lifted the head up with a wet suction sound. More blood cascaded down over the body. The creature removed the helmet and put its long fingers in the dead soldier's mouth. I knew what was coming next. I closed my eyes, but still heard the snapping sound of the jawbone being ripped off. I held my eyes shut. Maybe I should have shot the thing and tried to save the private. Why didn't I? Am I going to die a coward? "Do you understand me now, brother captain?" came the booming voice from the creature. I opened my eyes to see it only inches away from me, red eyes staring into mine. Where it once wore the head of a white man, now his face was the brown of a Latino man. Private Castillo, I believe the poor kid's name was. The monster was speaking English now. He must have acquired it from the remains of Private Castillo. For some reason, this skeletal figure wanted to have a little chat with me.